Everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Ketubot. Tonight is our second class, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 7 through 13. And tonight we're going to be talking um, we're going to continue where we left off last week. We're discussing whether the first time that the husband and wife have relations is a Friday night. Is it okay? And the Gemara on Daf 7 seems to say that it would be okay on festivals and on Shabbat, or maybe only on festivals but not on Shabbat. And the reason we mentioned last week was we are when they would have relations for the first time, it would cause I guess what we would call injury, right? There is blood, though we'll talk about that in a little bit, and that injury is called, right, a chabala, and we learned that you are not allowed to injure yourself on Shabbat or injure anybody on Shabbat, and that would be the problem. But it seems that on Daf 7, the Gemara ends this discussion by saying that the law is that it is acceptable. And interestingly enough, those of you who are familiar with some Jewish history, I know in Eastern Europe, but maybe in other places as well, there was actually a custom to have the wedding on Friday, either morning or afternoon, and it was a way to save money, because what they would do is they would have the wedding Friday afternoon, sing and dance, and then the meal would be a Friday night meal, which we all know from Masechet Shabbat needs to be a nice meal anyway, and this way you kind of killed two birds with one stone, and they would have that Friday night meal, and I guess as we said, right, their first time together would be Friday night. So it's interesting that that is what we see in the Gemara. The Gemara continues to talk about what we call Sheva Brachot. Sheva Brachot means literally 7 blessings. And the Gemara tells us that there was a custom, and there is a custom of even nowadays, that at the wedding and for a week after, they would recite 7 blessings for the couple. So the Gemara on Daf 7 tells us that is there a difference between a betula, a virgin who gets married, versus an almana, right, a widow or a divorcee? Is there a difference? So the Gemara says that both the betula and the almana need Sheva Brachot at the wedding. So everyone gets Sheva Brachot at the wedding. But it seems there's one opinion that if a widow marries a widower, maybe you don't need, though I don't think that that is the custom nowadays. The Gemara tells us that you need 10 men to actually say the blessings, which is why we actually have it here, when there's, let's say, a very small wedding, they'll go out to make sure that they have 10 men at a wedding. That is the minimum, so that there is a quorum of men, a minyan, and then they're able to make these 7 blessings. And the Gemara learns it from Boaz and Ruth, right? If you remember, when they get married, it says that he gathers the elders, and therefore it seems that we learn from here that you need 10 men. Interestingly, if you remember, both of them are widows, right? He is a widower and she is a widow, right? Boaz and Ruth, and they do say Sheva Brachot, apparently, says the Gemara, and therefore we see that a widow and a man and a woman who were both previously married, when they get married, they do need Sheva Brachot. That is learned from Boaz, but they don't need it for all the 7 days. There is a custom that we have Sheva Brachot, right? These 7 blessings, but really it's 7 nights of parties that are usually done after the wedding. And the idea is we want to celebrate with the bride and the groom another maybe secretive reason is because after the wedding night, generally the woman is a nida, and she cannot be with her husband after the wedding night, and therefore we entertain them for a week, and we give them something to do, to celebrate, to go out, and therefore we have that. The Gemara, however, says that for a widow, you need to celebrate for at least 3 days. Maybe not 7 full days, but definitely 3 days. Um, but if it's, let's say, a man who has never been married before, who marries a woman who has been married before, they do need Sheva Brachot for 7 days. But again, we need to make sure that he celebrates with her for 3 days, right? And the Gemara talks about, right, we don't want him to wake up the next day and go to work. It's not a regular day. He needs to celebrate with his wife. Um, another source for the concept of Sheva Brachot, of these 7 blessings, is from another verse where again they talk about it being done with a kahal, a quorum or a congregation, and that is the minimum is 10 people. And interesting, the same verse is used to teach that, and this is just a midrash, a story, that even, right, it says that everybody sang at the splitting of the Red Sea, at Yam Suf. And the midrash says, and here the Gemara tells us, using the same verse, that not only did every person sing at the splitting of the sea, but even fetuses in the uterus also sang at that time, right? Everybody who, I don't know, anyone who is anyone sang, and it's also based on the same verse that we mentioned. We mentioned Boaz and gathering 10 men. We said that it was for Sheva Brachot. The Gemara gives another reason why he gathered 10 men. It was to proclaim that it was okay, according to Jewish law, to marry a woman who converted from the nation of Ammon, right? If you remember, we have learned this previously. The Torah tells us that an Ammonite, meaning a man from, the Torah says an Ammoni, a person from Ammon or Moab, 2 different nations, they are not allowed to convert to Judaism because they didn't give food and water to the Jewish people in the desert. We learned that after that they extrapolated or interpreted it to mean Ammoni, the male, but not Ammonite, meaning a female would be allowed to convert, and therefore Boaz, again, because he's marrying a woman, right, from Moab, right, Moavi, and so he gathered these 10 men in order to publicize that one can marry a woman who's from Moab or Ammon, meaning, again, so root would be okay. Okay, we said that we say the 7 blessings at the chuppah, right, at the marriage, at the wedding ceremony. Maybe even, says the Gemara, at the engagement ceremony in Yehuda. If you remember, we mentioned last week that, first of all, it's important to understand that in the time of the Mishnah, there are 2 centers of Judaism in Israel. The north, right, the Galil, and the south, meaning center south, which was Yehuda, right, the tribe of Yehuda. And therefore, and we learned last week that there were different customs between the north and the south. And we learned last week that in Yehuda, in the south, they actually had a custom to allow the engaged couple to be alone so that they would get to know each other a little bit better. We're going to see today that, things might happen. And therefore, the Gemara tells us now that maybe they should already say Sheva Brachot when they get engaged at the engagement ceremony in Yehuda. In the Galil, in the north, even though they got engaged, they were not allowed to be alone. It was as if they were still dating, and they were not quasi-married, so it was different. And from here, since we mentioned the engagement period or process, the Gemara talks about the blessing of a Rusin, right? The blessing of a Rusin, the blessing that was done when they got engaged. And as I mentioned last week, we actually make that blessing at the chuppah. When the bride and the groom are under the chuppah, the wedding canopy, first there is a blessing for engagement, and then at the end of the ceremony, there are the Sheva Brachot because now they are married. So we actually have that. And the Gemara talks about what this blessing looks like, and it's in the Gemara on Daf 7. And back to the idea of Sheva Brachot, the Gemara tells us that every time you say Sheva Brachot, there needs to be a new person there. In Hebrew, it's called panim chadashot, meaning there needs to be a new person every night of the Sheva Brachot. Why? The idea is we want to celebrate the wedding, and therefore we're going to do it with new people, right? Every time a new person comes, right? Think about when you have a family event, right? So the first night it's exciting, the second night it's exciting, maybe by the third and the fourth and the fifth, maybe it's a little bit less exciting. Therefore, we're going to want to invite new people every time, at least one new person, and they're going to be the excitement of that evening, or they'll bring that excitement. Daf 8, we have the Gemara listing each one of the 7 blessings. I'm not going to read them out to you, but if you're not familiar with them, I would definitely encourage you to look at Daf 8 of Ketubot. They are really beautiful blessings. The theme, I would say the theme is obviously celebrating the bride and the groom. We have a theme of the Garden of Eden, of Gan Eden, of Adam, of the first couple, and I think the reason for that really is this idea that if you think about, one second, someone is. Okay. If when you think about Adam and Chava, right, Adam and Eve, when they were literally the only couple in the world, and our blessing is that this new couple should be right. Their love should be as if there's no one else in the world. It's just them. Then we go on to other blessings that talk about Jerusalem, where we want to celebrate the idea of Jerusalem, and it's really about right personal happiness, and I would say like national happiness, and really right there's a lot of words of happiness in these blessings, right? Gila, Rina, Ditza, right? There are actually many words of happiness, and this idea that we all are there to celebrate with this couple. So that's the Sheva Brachot. They're really beautiful blessings. And it's interesting that one blessing is we're celebrating with the Chatan and Kala, right? We're celebrating with the bride and the groom, or groom and the bride. And the next blessing is we're celebrating, right? We're blessing the Chatan im HaKala, right? With right the husband with his wife, right? We're celebrating the marriage itself, and the union, and it's really just they're really just such beautiful blessings. And since we're talking about, as I mentioned, it mentions Adam and Eve, so the Gemara continues to talk about how Adam and Eve were created, right? It says man in his image, and male and female, right? Man was created in the first chapter of Breshit. Man was created, it says, male and female, right? There's a discussion what that means. Was it male and female connected and then God separated them? Or, right, originally male and then later on we see female. Definitely in the second chapter in Breshit, we have the creation of Chava. Okay, then, as we mentioned, when new people come, we're going to say Sheva Brachot every night. And interestingly, the Gemara tells us that from day 7 till day 30 after the wedding, if someone new comes into the house, then we add a special blessing in order to celebrate with the bride and the groom. After 30 days till 1 year, if you have a meal to celebrate the wedding, then you can also make that specific blessing. And I think from here we get this idea that that first year, right? In Hebrew they say Shana Rishona. That first year is very special between the husband and the wife, and it really is a cause of celebration. I heard someone once said that they ate honey with their challah for the first year of marriage because it was, like sweet and new and like Rosh Hashanah every day for a year. So I thought that was a beautiful idea. Um, and again, different brachot that we say at different points in the life cycle. Um, the question here is the Gemara asks if the groom is part of the minyan, right? We said we needed 10 men. Is the groom added, right? Is he considered part of those 10? So the Gemara says, yes, the groom is part of the 10, but a mourner is not part of the 10. And then the Gemara says, oh, maybe a mourner is, right? And it's interesting. It really is like fascinating that those two people are compared, right? The groom and a mourner. I think it's right. It's interesting in terms of right the happiest moment in one's life and probably the most difficult moment in one's life. Right, a wedding, the beginning of something, a funeral, the end of life. It's interesting how, just as an aside, right, in Kohelet it talks about going to a funeral and going to a wedding. What's better? So it's interesting that here we're adding or we're comparing the groom with a mourner. The Gemara says a mourner is part of benching. He's part of when they bless after they make the blessing after the meal, but he's not part of the line that they make after a funeral. That line is in order to comfort the mourner, so it would make sense that the mourner would not be part of that line. And okay, hold on one second. Okay. Since we moved on to mourning, the Gemara gives a story about a child who dies very young, and what the rabbis said at the Shiva. Also interesting. Sheva Brachot. Interesting. 7 days. Okay, I just thought about that. I guess we have to think about it more. But maybe like really just parallel the beginning and the end. But the Gemara seems to quote different sages what they say at the what's called the Shiva house when they go to comfort the mourners. It does not seem like they are really comforting words. So the Gemara says, one of the sages says, well, the father is so important that God kind of puts on him the suffering of the nation, right? So you have to maybe suffer a little bit more because you're so important. Just a note, I would not say that to anybody who is mourning. So, I would not use these as options of things to say. But okay, the Gemara talks about a blessing that's said for the mourners. Baruch menachem avelim, right? Blessed is the one who comforts the mourners. Just a statement that's mentioned here, which is interesting. In Hebrew, we say, Al tiftach pe lesatan. Don't open your mouth to the Satan, to Satan. And it basically means don't say things that are going to happen. Like don't give the Satan things, right, or ideas, they say, right? So the Gemara says like don't say, oh, a lot of people are gonna die, right? Don't give the Satan any good ideas. Nice. Lynn is adding an important idea that 7 implies completion, right? We want to completely celebrate with the bride and the groom, and the same thing with comforting a mourner. So it's interesting, parallel the 7. It seems that there's also, the Gemara tells us on Daf 8, there's also a blessing. We said there's a blessing for the mourners. It seems there's also a blessing for the people who come to comfort the mourners. And there's a blessing for the nation, right? That God should help the nation. And interesting, the blessing here is Baruch Atah Otzer Hamagefa, right? Blessed is the God who ends the plague, or the right. I guess plague is a good word. Magefa. I just thought it was apropos for what we're experiencing in the past few years. So, blessed is God who ends the magefa, right? Who ends these, difficult times. Um, Okay, the Gemara talks about drinking 10 cups of wine in a mourner's house. It's the wine is there to lighten the spirits. I don't think nowadays we drink wine in a mourner's house, but it seems that, again, in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they didn't really drink water. They drank wine, so I guess they're saying stay hydrated, and you should drink it before, during, and after the meal. And it's important to be drinking. I don't think it means getting drunk, but I think it means to maybe to relax a little bit, to take the edge off. The Gemara, since we're talking about mourning, the Gemara now talks about funerals. And interestingly enough, the Gemara tells us that funerals used to be extremely expensive, because they used to bury the person in very expensive shrouds. And Rabban Gamliel, who we're going to talk about a little bit more later on tonight, Rabban Gamliel decided, he looked around, and I think this is really part of his character. He was very aware of what was going on around him. He was the leader of the people at the time, of the community, and he looked around and he saw that people were, leaving dead bodies because they couldn't afford to bury them. And he said, he made a decree, or maybe more of a request, that when he died, he wanted to be buried in the simplest of shrouds, right? Linen, simple shrouds, and that's what they did. And from then on, everybody said, "Oh, what do we think we're more important than Rabban Gamliel? Oh, we also want to be buried in linen shrouds." And from there came the custom, which literally for 2,000 years we've been doing, that Jewish people are generally buried in simple linen shrouds. So that actually comes from Rabban Gamliel, and it was a way for him to kind of even the playing field for these funerals that got out of hand. Okay, Daf 9, we're going to start a new topic. If you remember, we started off last week talking about the days that a woman should get, a man and a woman should get married, and we said that a virgin, a betula, should get married on a Wednesday, so that if there's an issue, the husband can come on Thursday morning to court. So now we're going to talk about that issue. There are two things that the husband can say. One is what we call, or the Gemara calls, petach patuach. Petach patuach means literally, I found the door open. And it means, right, a euphemism for she was not a virgin. Now, it's important to recognize that it's not saying we didn't see any blood, which we'll also talk about. So there are two things that you can say. One is we didn't see any blood. The other is that the husband says that when we had relations, it felt as if there was no hymen there, and therefore she wasn't a virgin. Now, there are a few things that we need to understand. First of all, these things do not apply nowadays. This is not something that is applicable. And it's important to understand as well that it definitely in the time of the Mishnah, maybe even in the time of the Gemara, or in general, women were getting married much younger. And therefore, if you're talking about a 12, 13-year-old girl, that's very different than nowadays someone getting married at 20, 25, 30. Just anatomically, that is very different. And the Gemara actually discusses that. So yes, Lynn is telling us, one second, we haven't gotten there yet. But so let's get to the idea. The idea is the husband comes to court and he says, Petach patuach, I found this, the door wide open, as they say. So now the question is, what do we do? Now, there's two things that we have to think about. One is what we would say is monetary, right? Because we learned that a betula, right, a virgin gets 200 zuz for her ketuva, whereas a woman who has had relations before, right, a divorcee or a widow, gets 100 zuz. So that's monetary. The other issue is, don't forget, before the wedding, they were actually engaged, but not engaged in the way we understand it, right? Engaged in the sense that they were like, we'll call it half married. If they're half married, she is not allowed to be with anybody else. If the woman is with anybody else, that is seen as adultery. And that is very problematic. So we're dealing with both of those issues. Okay, so let's go through the cases. Again, if he says petach patuach, right, it was very easy. That implies, again, as I mentioned, she isn't a betula. And again, he's claiming that she had an affair. And then the question is, who is believed? So the Gemara says that he's believed to forbid her to him, right? If she has an affair, she is now not allowed to be with him anymore. But we don't know if she really did have an affair, right? There's doubt, right? He doesn't know for sure. That's called safek. Safek means a doubt. If there's a doubt, so we don't know if she had an affair, and let's say she did sleep with somebody, we don't know if it happened before they got engaged or after they got engaged, right? And therefore, and we'll see in a minute, unfortunately, we're going to bring up an unfortunate case of her having relations against her will, right? If she was seduced, if she was raped, that is also would make her not a virgin, but if it was against her will, she would not be prohibited from her husband. So we have a lot of doubt going on, and therefore, let's see who's believed. So the Gemara continues, right? If he says he, right, he betrothed someone, so then he is, sorry, we're going to take a step back and we're going to talk about who we believe, right? If a man comes to court and says, I betrothed this woman, we believe him to say that now he's forbidden to her relatives. Remember, if they're engaged, he's forbidden to her relatives. So we see here that he is believed. But here we say it's different than our case because, as I mentioned, there is doubt, right? It's he said, she said. How do we believe? Who do we believe? So again, the Gemara tells us that a woman is only prohibited to her husband when there's actually warning, right? If he says, I saw you, I see you're really friendly with John, and I don't like this. You better stay away from John. That's called a warning. And then if they see that she goes into a hotel room with the same guy, that John, that he told her to stay away from, okay, now that's problematic, right? There's a warning and they secluded together. That would be problematic. And that's actually, we learned from David and Bathsheba, though the Gemara takes a step back and says, no, because nobody warned anybody about David and Bathsheba. And again, the Gemara says, really, right, maybe he just took her. It was not voluntary, or maybe, right, here the Gemara tells us that, and this is very famous, that again, just to remind ourselves for those who aren't familiar, right, King David is the king. He sees Bathsheba from the roof, and she's actually a married woman. He knows her husband. He actually brings her to the palace, seemingly against her will, and he sleeps with her. Then he tells her husband, go home and sleep with your wife, right, just in case she gets pregnant, which she did. But the husband does not sleep with her. And anyway, it's a big scandal, though the Gemara, we learned a few years ago that the Gemara says really David did nothing wrong. One explanation is the following line. The Gemara on Daf 9 tells us that David actually made every soldier who was going out to war write a get to his wife, a bill of divorce that said, if I don't come back from war, so then really you're retroactively divorced. And therefore that would make Bathsheba retroactively divorced and permitted to David. But again, back to our case, right? He says petach patuach. So the Gemara says then he doesn't have to pay the Ketuva, right? We believe him because it's a very serious claim. And why would he make this claim if he didn't really think that that was the case? However, right, so the Gemara says in Yehuda, remember, in the region in the south, he cannot make this claim because, as I mentioned, we said that in Yehuda, they would actually let the engaged couple be alone. And we know sometimes what could happen when an engaged couple is left alone. And therefore, the Gemara says that in the region of Yehuda, the husband is not allowed to say petach patuach because, maybe he was the one who opened that door in the first place. Again, in the Galil, in the north, we say we do believe him because, again, they were not together. Okay. If he claims that there was no blood, okay, so now we believe him because there is something objective. Now, don't compare it to nowadays. Again, nowadays, many women do not bleed for the first time. I again, as I mentioned, I think it's attributed to anatomy. Women getting married a little bit older. I think also nowadays women are much more active, right? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but right, bike riding, horseback riding, using tampons as well will also reduce the amount of blood that a woman might see on the first night. So, okay, but in those days, let's say he claims that there's no blood. The Gemara says that he is believed. Daf 10, as we mentioned, we said that the Betula, the virgin, gets 200 zuz, the widow 100. And again, this is important to understand because we want to prevent the husband from easily divorcing his wife. And if he needs to pay either 100 or 200, that will prevent him from easily trying to divorce his wife. However, as we mentioned, the Gemara says he is believed to say petach patuach. He is believed, and then he doesn't have to pay the Ketuva. Again, the Gemara seems to say the only way he would say this is because it was true, right? He wouldn't, interesting, the Gemara says, a man wouldn't pay for an entire wedding only to, claim that, never mind, this wasn't what I signed up for the next day, right? Meaning the claim, it seems, would only be made if it was true. Okay, from here the Gemara talks about we talked about the money that one would have to pay for the Ketuva. Where does that money come from? Again, in the time of
the Mishnah and the Gemara, it was a very agrarian society. People owned land. And therefore, right, it's not like you had a bank account, and it's not like you had a lot of gold coins, around. So you would generally pay by selling land or giving land. We will learn, or the Gemara here tells us, there are actually three types of land, right? Your best land, medium, and the worst land. Um, so if you owe somebody money on a biblical level, on a deoraita level, you are going to have to pay with the best land. But if you owe money from something that's only rabbinic level, you can pay with the lowest level land. So here the Gemara tells us that the Ketuva money can come from the lowest level. So the Gemara says, oh, that seems to imply that a Ketuva is rabbinic in origin. Now, we'll see that that's actually a machloket. The next line in the Gemara is, wait a minute, but we know that Ketuva is on a biblical level. How can you say that it is on a rabbinic level? So the Gemara says maybe the Ketuva for a betula, for the virgin, is biblical, but the Ketuva for the widow is rabbinic. That's one way to look at it. Or we'll see as we continue in this Masachet, the machloket continues. From here, very interestingly, the Gemara gives us 6 different cases of a man who comes to court and says petach patuach, and then interestingly, the Gemara is not so, or the court is not so quick to believe him, right? So a man comes and says petach patuach, and they say, how do you know what it's supposed to feel like, right? That's what Lynn was implying, right? How do you know? It must be that you were with, you've been with women before, maybe prostitutes. It seems that that city had a lot of issues with prostitutes. And therefore, the Gemara says, well, you know what? We'll believe him, but now we're going to give him lashes for being with prostitutes because he shouldn't have done that. That's inappropriate. Another case, again, he says petach patuach. The sages or the court says to him, well, maybe you went in on an angle, and that's why it felt open, but really she was a virgin, right? It was the angle. Another one is he says there was no blood, and the judge says, bring me the sheet, and it seems that the judge washes the sheet, and then was revealed a few drops of blood, and he said, you see, really she was a virgin. The fourth case is I think slightly more problematic, but or I guess sensitive or insensitive, but anyway, the fourth case is, again, they said no blood. He says she's not a virgin. She says I am a virgin. What's interesting, okay, she says she is a virgin. So they do this science experiment. They take 2 servants, non-Jewish women. One is a virgin, one is not. They sit them on top of either on top of or in a barrel of wine, and apparently for the woman who was not a virgin, you could smell the wine from her mouth, but right, it like went through, whereas for the virgin it didn't. So then they put the bride also, like after the experiment, so they put the bride on the barrel of wine, and you couldn't smell wine, and that's how they proved that she was still a virgin. Interesting, there's a note in the Steinsaltz or Koren Gemara, this idea of alcohol kind of passing into the respiratory system, right? So like, right, when people drink, you can smell, well, that's when people drink, you can smell alcohol on their breath, meaning it does actually go through into their lungs. So maybe here there's something like that, even though we all know that anatomically none of this is connected. Do not try the experiment at home, but whatever. Okay. since we're continuing, again, he says, she said she was a virgin, but there was no blood. It seems that the fifth case is, it turns out that the bride was from a certain family, that they knew that this family doesn't bleed. And therefore, she continues to have her Ketuva, and she's still a virgin, and I know they all lived happily ever after, though the Gemara tells us you should just know that if there's a lot of blood, it's good for fertility. So that's interesting. So for this girl, it was good in the story, but maybe it won't be so good for her later on down the line. And the last case is actually a case where it was a time of famine. And again, he says, I didn't see any blood. She says, I'm a virgin. And basically, they recognized, and again, I think this is so important, right? The sages being sensitive to what's going on, right? And it says, like, that they looked at the people and they saw that they were like dark and that their skin was sticking to their bones, right? And basically, they saw that they were malnourished. So they brought them into a room and they fed them and they gave them to drink, and then they had relations and she saw blood. So again, they all lived happily ever after. Okay. Next Mishnah on Daf 10. As we said, the Betula gets 200. Almana, the widow, gets 100. If there is a widow or a divorcee who's still a virgin, right? Again, we said if they get divorced or he dies before they actually got married, right? But while they were still engaged, so she gets 200, even though she's a divorcee, because she's still a betula, she gets 200. From here, there's some like how did someone say, a lot of play on words, or like etymology of words. If anybody's into linguistics, you'll really like this stuff. So it talks about, right, she's called an almana, meaning a widow is an almana, right? Al shem mana, or maneh, because she will get 100, right? A maneh is the word here for 100 zuz. So she's called a divorcee because she's going to get 100 zuz in her Ketuva. The Gemara says, well, wait a minute. She's called an almana in the Torah, and only later on do we find out she's going to get 100 zuz. And the Gemara says, yeah, sometimes the Torah has words based on something that will happen in the future. The same thing about the river that leaves Eden. And then here the Gemara talks about rain, which is matar. And then it says how there are different characteristics of this matar. And they all start, it's like an alliteration, right? It's mashke, mazin, right? The rain gives water and it satiates and it gives sustenance. So there's a lot of like play on words here. And from here, we talk about dates being very good to eat, but only at certain times of the day, but it's good for your mind and it's good for your stomach. So other words. And then the Gemara talks about the Aramaic word for door, which is dasha. Dasha. So it's derech sham, right? You go through the door to get somewhere. That's why it's called dasha. Or a ladder is called darga, derech gag. It's the way to get to the roof. That's why it's called a darga, a ladder. So if you like linguistics, so you'll like this stuff. Okay, next stuff, 11. We have the next Mishnah. A convert, a maidservant, or a Jewish girl who is taken captive, if all of these things happened before they were 3 years old, they're considered betulot, virgins, even if, again, if there was relations before 3, halachically, according to Jewish law, if, again, I don't think that this is real, but okay, whatever. According to Jewish law, if a girl has relations before she's 3 years old, the betulim, the hymen, grows back, and she's still seen as a virgin. After 3 years old, that is not the case. Okay, and those women get 200 zuz. So we see from here that a court can convert a child who's under 13. Um, but right, and what about like a girl who's converting? Right, so it seems that this proves that a girl can convert very young. Or no, maybe right, a father comes with his children and they convert everybody. But when they right, then the question is, what happens? Like, is this girl considered Jewish once she becomes 12? So the Gemara says that when she grows up, she can decide that she doesn't want to be Jewish. But the question is when, right? So the Gemara says that at age 12, right, when she becomes an adult, she needs to either affirm, right, meaning still continue to keep the mitzvot, or she can protest. But if she doesn't protest, then that's seen as an acceptance, and she can't turn around when she's 30 and say, never mind, I don't want to be Jewish anymore, right? That does not work. You can't just like turn around and decide not to be Jewish. Okay, the next Mishnah again. Some might say it's like problematic, but what's the idea? We're trying to determine who is a bitula, right? Who is seen as a virgin? And we said, right, even if a girl had relations before 3, she's considered a virgin. What if like a minor had relations with an adult, right? So the Gemara says, right, a man who has relations with a girl under 3, she's still seen as a bitula. A boy who's under 9 who has relations with a woman, she's also a bitula because a boy under 9 is not seen as being capable of having relations, so she is still seen as a bitula, the woman. Next idea is a woman who's called mukat eitz. The word really means like injured with a piece of wood, and it basically means someone who lost her virginity through some sort of injury, and not through having relations. So the Gemara says that the women that we mentioned before get 200 zuz, all of the women, but the sages say that the mukat eitz, a woman who had some sort of injury, she gets 100 zuz. And again, here we have to understand, right, is it about having relations or is it about not being a virgin anymore? And that like determines, right, 100 or 200. Okay, and converts, maidservants, and captured women over the age of 3, we assume that they did have relations beforehand, and therefore they get 100 zuz. Okay, the Gemara tells us, again, right, as I mentioned, the minor with a woman is not seen as, she's still seen as a bitula. Maybe she becomes a mukat eitz. It's seen that she's, a virgin, but not a virgin, right? It wasn't seen really as having relations. Okay, as I mentioned, right, a woman who's a bogeret, meaning over 12 and a half. So as she gets older, the Gemara explains that her bitulim, gets thinner, right? The hymen gets thinner as she matures, and even if she doesn't bleed or she won't bleed, she still gets 200, right? Because again, she hasn't been with any man. And here the Gemara tells us that a woman is believed to say that she was injured, again, let's say he says, "Oh, she had an affair," and she says, "No, it was an injury. It wasn't because I had relations." She still gets her Ketuva. There's a machloket how much, but she does get her Ketuva. From here, the Gemara talks about the concept. In Hebrew, it's called motzi shem ra, which means someone who is trying to defile a person's name, right? Meaning, like, give them a bad reputation. So again, if he says she wasn't a virgin, he's saying bad things about her. Again, let's say if he has witnesses that she had an affair while she was betrothed, so then that's bad news. That's having an affair. She could get killed. That's a prohibition. If he has witnesses that she slept with someone before they were engaged, that's not really a prohibition, and therefore she gets 100 zuz, right? She still gets Ketuva, but she gets 100 zuz. What if, again, he comes and he says she wasn't a virgin, and she says, well, I was actually raped after we got engaged. And he says, no, 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 it happened before we got engaged, right? So again, if it happened after she got engaged, so then she's permitted to her husband and gets a Ketuva. If it happened before they got engaged, then he can say, this is not what I signed up for. It's called mekach ta'ut. This is not the original agreement that we had. I assumed you were going to be a virgin and you're not. And when we, got engaged, you didn't tell me, and therefore you shouldn't get anything. Again, and that's the discussion. If it's does she get 200 or 100, or maybe she gets 100 or she doesn't get anything, because he says that that it was a miscommunication. Daf 12, we have a new Mishnah that tells us that if the groom, again, as we mentioned, in the area of Yehuda, if he ate by the in-laws when they were engaged, and then they get married, he can't claim that she isn't a virgin, as we mentioned, because they were left alone. So therefore, who knows what happened? As we said, in the Galil, that is not the case. Next Mishnah, as we mentioned, the widow gets 100, and it doesn't matter if she's the daughter of a Yisrael or a Kohen. It seems that there was a court of priests that would say that their daughters should get 400 zuz, right? Again, Kohanim are very important people in society. So they said our daughters get 400, not 200. So the Gemara says, no, again, an important family can ask for more, right? Whether she's a Kohen or not. But you don't have to, but they can ask for more. The next Mishnah, again, he finds that she isn't a virgin. She says she was raped after they were already engaged, and she so here she is not forbidden to him, and she gets her Ketuva, right? Again, because it happened after they were engaged. He said it happened before they were engaged, and as I mentioned, it's a mekach ta'ut. He wants to say that this is right. There shouldn't be any Ketuva. Some say she's believed. Some say no, right? Actually, Rabban Gamliel says that she's believed, and others say Rabbi Yoshua says she needs to be proof. She needs to bring proof. Otherwise, she is not believed. And here there's a discussion just in terms of some Gemara language. When somebody makes, right, two people make a claim, right? He said, she said. If one person is sure, what's called bari. Bari in Aramaic means sure. And the other one is not sure, but still is making this claim, thinks, suspects, has a doubt. That's called shema, right? Maybe, right? So if you have someone who's sure against someone who's not sure, sure wins. That's one issue. Another issue is a concept that's called migo. Migo is a really interesting case, and that is, just if anybody's a lawyer, I think it's interesting, right? When somebody makes a statement or a claim, and they could have made, if they were lying, they could have come up with a better lie. And if there was something better that they could have said, and they didn't, right, and they said the other statement, then we are inclined to believe that other statement, because if they're lying, right? Like when a mother says, really, that's the best you could have made up, right? You can make up a better, right? Come up with a better excuse. My dog ate my homework, not flying, right? But if you come up with this really good excuse, so, right, um, so here the case is, again, if he says she wasn't a virgin and she says, oh, I was raped after we got engaged, really she could have said, I was injured, right? I was mukat etz. That's nicer to say. But the fact that she says that she was raped, um, as at least Rabban Gamliel says, that's a migo. We say she's believed to say that because she could have, if she was going to make something up, she could have made up something better. So Rabban Gamliel believes her. Rabbi Yoshua says no. I don't care. There's doubt, and because there's doubt, we do not believe her. The next case on Daf 13 is again, he says she's not a virgin. She says it was an injury, as we said, mukat eitz. Now she says it is an injury. He says, no, you had an affair, right? So again, Rabban Gamliel believes her. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you need to prove it. Otherwise, we believe him. So again, here it seems the question is, what are they arguing about? Are they arguing about money? Are they arguing about if she is forbidden to him or not? What about there's a single woman and she's seen speaking to someone, and now I'm going to put speaking in quotation marks because the Gemara says that it's not speaking, right? But basically, a single woman is seen with another man, and then they say, who is that guy? And she says, oh, it's my friend, whatever, John Katz. He's a Kohen. She's believed that, and interesting, seems that we assume that they slept together, but we think that because she's believed to say that he was Jewish and that he was a Kohen, and therefore she is still able to marry a Kohen afterwards. And we don't assume that she slept with someone who is forbidden to her, like a mamzer or somebody else or a non-Jew. Or we say we do not believe her. That's case number one. Case number two is there's a single woman and she's pregnant, and they say to her, who's the father? And she says, oh, John Katz, the Kohen, he's the father. Again, Rabban Gamliel says we believe her. Rabbi Yeshua says we do not believe her. And the question is, how far do we not believe her? Do we say that her daughter, let's say she has a daughter, is the daughter allowed to marry a Kohen or not? So the Gemara explains, number one, when we said that the woman was speaking to somebody else, it means she secluded with him. She went into a dark alley. She was seen coming out of a dark place. So we assume that something inappropriate happened, and the Gemara is going to explain why in a minute. Again, we said that we believe her to say that the person wasn't okay to be with. However, right, we do not prohibit the woman from being with her husband if she's secluded with a man, like a married woman. But here we have a single woman. We might not, again, let her marry a Kohen because there is that doubt that maybe she was with somebody who she was not allowed to be with. From here, we talked about a woman secluding with someone, a woman sleeping with someone when they're not married. From here, the Gemara talks about a woman who's taken captive. That seemed to have happened a lot, or at least it's discussed a lot in the Gemara. People being captured for, kidnapped for a ransom. And here we assume that if they were non-Jews, which is generally the case, we assume that they raped her. So here, even if she says that she wasn't raped, the assumption is that she was. And the Gemara says that because we assume that most non-Jews are inappropriate or loose, or if they're already kidnapping her, what's going to stop them from violating her? And again, this Gemara ends with this idea of I don't want to say we can't trust people, but when it comes to sexuality, there are a lot of doubts. Let's put it that way. The Gemara seems to imply it's not only non-Jews who can't control themselves, even Jews can't control themselves. And it's interesting that we saw in this week's daf, whether it's the engaged couple in Yehuda who were allowed to be alone. Again, it's important to understand that according to Jewish law, a man and a woman are not supposed to be alone in a room if they're not married, right? It's called yichud. The idea is, again, to prevent impropriety, right? And here the Gemara really recognizes the urges, or I should say, right, the natural urges that people have, and there are rules or laws or fences that the rabbis created in order to prevent, some of these cases from happening. And I think it's interesting to. I think times haven't changed that much, in terms of that. But it's interesting to hear how the Gemara relates to this and how it takes effect or has like a practical application later on. But the bottom line is it's interesting when the man is believed, when the woman is believed, and what the repercussions are, right? Again, if it's just monetary, or is it to prohibit one from the other? But it is important to realize that nowadays this really doesn't exist. There's no such thing as, the husband coming to court and saying, she wasn't a virgin, so, I want to annul the marriage or something like that. We don't really have that nowadays. So with that, we will end another week of Masechet Ketubot. And we can remember we were talking about the Sheva Brachot and the beauty of marriage and all that. So there were many positive takeaways from tonight's discussion, though some parts of it were quite difficult. So with that, I wish everyone a good week, a Shavua Tov, and looking forward to continuing next week as well. So have a good week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you so much.